In order to be able to work on something in 3ds Max, it must first be selected. You'll find the Select Object icon on the left-hand side of your toolbar. That button will remain on until you enter another command, and that comes in handy as you won't always have to click on it in order to be able to select something in your scene. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go to the command panel and activate any of the geometry creation commands. With that command now active, take note that the Object Selection button has automatically been turned off. If we simply right-click on the screen to cancel out our creation command, the Select Object button turns back on. So you pretty much stay in select mode unless another command has been activated. Selecting in Max can be done a couple of different ways. The first is by simply clicking on top of the object. Notice that the cursor is currently shaped in the form of a white arrow. This is Max's way of telling you that it's ready to select. By moving your mouse on top of an object, you'll notice the cursor changing to a plus sign. When working in wireframe mode, the color of your selection will turn white. If you're instead working in shaded mode, and we can do that by simply typing F3 on the keyboard, your selection will instead have a white bracket or bounding box around its border. Now that selection bracket can be turned on and off using the keyboard shortcut, the letter J. Let's return to wireframe mode by typing F3. Adding to a selection can be done by simply holding down the Control key when clicking. When you move your mouse away from an object, you'll notice the white arrow now has a plus sign down to its lower left corner. Subtracting or removing from a selection can be done by instead holding down the Alt key. Notice that changes the mark directly below the cursor to a minus sign. If you're simply wanting to deselect everything in your scene, click away from all your objects. If you find yourself continually working on the same object, you can lock your selection, which would prevent you from inadvertently deselecting what you're working on. To do that, you'll want to select your object, drop below the timeline around frame 40, turning on the little lock, which reads Selection Lock Toggle. Now there's a faster way that you can do that by simply tapping the spacebar. Be aware that when the selection lock is on, you won't be able to select anything else in your scene. So be careful, it's pretty easy to inadvertently hit the spacebar by mistake. Let's go ahead and unlock that and deselect what we might have selected. Another way to make a selection is by drawing a window around the object with your mouse. Now that window can be drawn by dragging either left to right or right to left. Whether your window has to go completely around the object or simply touch a portion of it is controlled by the window crossing icon on the left-hand side of the toolbar. If that command is turned on, meaning the icon now looks like the white box has been positioned to the middle of the broken square, this indicates that when windowing you have to go completely around your object. Simply crossing a portion of the object won't select it. And you can select multiple things certainly by simply windowing around them. Now, back on the toolbar, if you change the icon to the crossing version, the white box in the pictures you see is now laying on top of the side of the broken line. With it in this state, you can now window completely around and still make a selection, or you can simply draw a line that partially makes contact with your object. Either way you go, you can now select. When window selecting, the shape of the selection window can be changed to better facilitate your selection. That option too is found on the left-hand side of the toolbar. Let's take a look at some of the options. Now we've been using the rectangular selection, and that'll draw our window in a square or rectangular shape. Changing to a circular icon you see creates a circular selection ring. There's also one in the list called Fence, which gives you the opportunity to custom shape your selection device. You simply click, drag, let go, and then continue clicking. Another option in the list is the lasso command. With this, you can drag around your object in a kind of lasso shape. And the last one in the list is called Paint Selection. Holding down your mouse and moving it brings up a small white ring. Painting over an object will now select it. While in object mode, you can toggle between your selection shapes by simply typing the Q key on the keyboard. Let's take our selection window back to a rectangular shape. By the way, if you're out of select and in another command, Q will take you back to select mode. To show you that, I'll go back to the right-hand side, clicking on any button, and then simply tap Q on my keyboard. In doing so, notice that Select Object has been reactivated. You can also select objects by name. Back on the left-hand side of the toolbar, you'll activate Select by Name. Within this list, you can find all the elements or objects in your scene, or filter out only the type of elements or objects that you're wanting to pick from. On the second row in the dialog on the right-hand side, you also have options to select all your objects, deselect what might be selected in the list, or to be able to reverse or invert your selection. Once you've chosen from the list the objects or elements you want to select, down in the lower right-hand corner, you can either click OK or simply double-click with your mouse. There's also a few additional selection options located in the Edit pull-down. One that you might find especially helpful is to be able to select all the objects in the scene by their wireframe color. If you find yourself in a situation where you're selecting the same objects time and again, you can speed up your workflow by creating what is called a selection set. We'll use a file named Selection Sets to show you how that's done. You can find the file over in the Working Files folder. Opening the Select by Name list by typing H, you can see that the scene consists of a healthy handful of objects, many of which are merely smaller parts to a larger object, like the pieces of the chairs or the table and the objects resting on it. The chances of wanting to move or in some other way manipulate those larger whole entities is probably pretty good as you possibly decide to redesign the layout of your area at some point while working on the project. Let's create a selection set out of the chair on the left-hand side. We'll click on the frame, hold the Control key down, then select both cushions. With those three objects now selected, we'll go to the toolbar on the right-hand side under the area where it says Create Selection Set. Go ahead and click on that field. Now we can type in the name that we're going to give this selection set. Let's call it Chair. After typing, you're going to want to press Enter to lock things in. Once the selection set has been created, the individual chair objects can still be selected and changed. But the entire chair, made up of all the separate parts, can now easily be adjusted as a whole by using the selection set. Let's go back to the selection set category in the toolbar and click on the black arrow pointing down. From the list, we can now choose Chair. With all three parts selected, let's go ahead and move or rotate that object. Let's also create a selection set out of the parts of the table that'd be the top and two legs, and then the objects that rest on the table. Again, we'll click on those objects, holding down the Control key as we do. With those all now selected, we'll go back up to the selection set list and in the field type in Table. Again, all the individual pieces can easily be moved on their own, but we can now manipulate the table and all its parts as one collective whole. You might also run into situations where you'd like to be able to selectively choose only certain types of components in a scene. For that, Max offers a handful of selection filters. To see how those work, let's use a file named Selection Filters, which can be found in the Working Files folder. The selection filter can be found on the left-hand side of the toolbar, just to the left of the Select Object icon. By default, being set to All enables you to be able to select any object or component within your scene. If we were to change the filter over to Geometry, the only things in the scene that would be able to be selected would be those pink spheres you see at the top of the view. But anything else in the scene is now unselectable. And the same would hold true for any of the other filter options. Let's go down to Shapes. Now the only shape on our screen is going to be that light green arc down at the middle center. Let's go ahead and window everything and see what it actually selects. Let's instead change the filter to Cameras. Again, we'll drag a window around everything, but the only thing that actually selects is going to be the camera that you see in the lower left-hand side of the view. Let's try the Lights filter. Now, what makes the filter especially handy is when you have objects that lie one on top of the other. Look at the pink sphere in the middle. Down to its lower left-hand side, you'll see a little gold diamond which represents a light. If you window select around that entire area, having filtered out everything but the light selects only the light. And that makes it very easy to be able to grab it and not possibly the sphere instead. One thing to be aware of though, if you've got your filter set to anything other than All and you're trying to select something and you can't, well, maybe it's because you filtered it out. So if unable to make a specific type of selection, make sure to check that filter on the toolbar. So that'll give you a few options when making a selection. Now, each of those techniques is important, so be sure to practice up so you can make the most out of them.